Those are the options. And because none of those eight, the Hateful Eight that I just mentioned, none of them have a cure. None of them even have a treatment. They only have a prevention. We're not preventing anything. And that's why you felt like you were not helping any of your patients, because you weren't addressing those eight root causes that you yourself know to be the big problem in medicine.
Yeah, it's like a leaking roof, isn't it? The roof's leaking, and you're just putting a bucket there to pick up the water. That's kind of what the drugs are doing. Yeah, it's great. There's no water there on the floor, so you can live a little bit better. But you're not getting to the cause, right? You need to fix the leak in the roof, and then actually you no longer need the buckets.
Right. Well, and you won't. The problem is if you don't fix the leak in the roof, you won't have a house.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite parts of the book. These eight processes that are occurring in all of us, and they're either promoting health and longevity, or they're actually the opposite and creating illness and ultimately disease. And I really love the way you said actually medicines aren't really tackling those things. And I just want to be really clear for people that antihypertensives or drugs in general, they have a role sometimes, right? They can be helpful in certain situations. I think you're in agreement with that. It's just
I'm not against them.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not against them per se, but the problem is that if you don't fix the underlying problem, what have you done? Okay, so it's fine to give a statin to lower an LDL, but what have you done? Have you actually fixed the problem? You haven't done a damn thing about the problem. The problem's still there. Okay, so the very first sentence of the book, okay, starts like this: you find a wasp in your attic. What do? Kill the wasp, or find the wasp's nest? You have to work upstream of a problem to solve a problem. Working downstream of a problem only fixes the result of the problem. The problem's still there. And if you can kill the wasp, but then the next time you go up into the attic, you're going to be stung into submission by all the other wasps.
Yeah.
Because you didn't fix the problem.
I think we really need to. I want to make sure everyone listening and watching this has got this, that what you're talking about is really at the heart of pretty much every single chronic disease that's going on at the moment, that is afflicting families, it's overwhelming healthcare systems, it's causing disability, it's causing reduction in the quality of life, and actually most of them are caused by malfunction in these eight areas. But ultimately, what you're making a very strong case for is that it's actually the modern food environment, this highly ultra-processed food that we are consuming in inordinate quantities, is actually at the root cause. And unless we deal with that as a root cause, we're going to be struggling. People are going to be suffering. Healthcare systems are going to be suffering, and we're not going to get anywhere. Your intro to the book was, it literally was so punchy. Like, we could just do a podcast on the introduction, frankly. But there's a couple of bits I've underlined, which if you don't mind me reading it back to you, your own book.
I so appreciate that you called my intro punchy, because several people on Amazon have said all he did was rant. But I guess it depends on how concerned you are about the problem.
Yeah. And this is such a big problem. Like, it's arguably the biggest problem that's going on across the globe at the moment. Because, and you see in your kids, right? You see kids. I see kids. And when you see a 7-year-old with pre-diabetes, you're like, this wasn't happening 25 years ago. Something is going on. We can't just give them metformin or what. We have to try and figure out what's causing this.
Right. Kids are the canaries in the coal mine. And if you ignore it, you do it at your own risk. That's just that simple. And that's what we're doing. We've ignored it. The other thing is that everybody right now is completely distracted. Okay, they're distracted by this thing called COVID. Okay, and I understand why. And it's certainly distracting. However, let's talk about that for a minute. Okay, people are dying in droves in every country, UK, US, you name it. Do you know where they're not dying? They're not dying in countries that actually still have real food. Third world countries actually have a very low death rate. And it's not because they're using masks or hand washing, or social distancing. The reason is because they're eating real food. And we have the data on mortality rates of the different countries. I can put it up on the screen if you want. But the bottom line is, it's only the developed countries that have the high mortality rates. Now, why is that? So, we've identified the elderly, and they have immune dysfunction. We understand that. They can't generate the same cytokine response that you need, that everyone else should be able to. Okay, let's put the elderly aside for a moment, because that's true everywhere. It was true in Italy, too. But the other three things, the other three demographics that were shown to be, related to COVID mortality, here they are. People of color, the obese, and pre-existing conditions. Those three. People of color, the obese, pre-existing conditions. What do those three demographics share in common?
Probably poor socioeconomic conditions, poor diet, lots of highly processed food.
Right. Ultra-processed food consumption. Crappy diet, ultra-processed food consumption. So why should your food make a difference as to whether you die from COVID or not? Why is that? Here's why. Three reasons. Number one, the virus is very smart. It wants to attack all your cells. And every cell in your body has a receptor that helps regulate water within the cell. And that receptor is called ACE2, ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. It's an endocrine receptor, okay? And that's where angiotensin works, and it involves water transport. All right? So every cell has it. Turns out the virus uses that protein as its injector point. Well, high insulin increases ACE2 because high insulin causes water retention. And so there are more ACE2s on all your cells, so you are more at risk of being infected when your insulin's high. And your insulin's high because of processed food. That's one. Number two, diabetes, high blood glucose. High blood glucose, turns out the glucose actually crystallizes around the edges of those ACE2s, holding them open, making it even easier for the virus to inject its RNA. Number three, short-chain fatty acids. So short-chain fatty acids come from fiber consumption. And of course, ultra-processed food is devoid of fiber. Short-chain fatty acids suppress the cytokine response. And we now know it's not the virus that kills you. It's your cytokine response that kills you, because your cytokine response is basically sort of like a nuclear blast that affects even your normal cells, but it's trying to get rid of the foreign invader. But you have to temper it. You have to be able to manage it. You have to be able to pull it back. You have to be able to minimize it. Short-chain fatty acids that come from the digestion of fiber in the gut are one of the things that improves that cytokine response. And that's why fiber is anti-inflammatory and also improves insulin sensitivity. But processed food doesn't have any fiber. It's been, that's been removed for shelf life. So those three demographics, people of color, the obese, pre-existing conditions, big ultra-processed food consumers, high sugar, low fiber, processed food, not real food. The CDC and the NIH and the MRC and everyone and Public Health England, no one is talking about food in COVID.
Yeah.
This is the fourth leg of the stool. Okay, we all talked about masking and hand washing and social distancing. Garbage. Fix the food.
Now, I think when we're talking about foods, I think we need to get clear on terminology for people who are listening and they think, okay, look, I get this. Highly processed food is at the root cause of many of these chronic diseases. Over half of what we're consuming as a country, as a Western society, are these foods. So I guess we need to really help people understand, what are these foods? There's this part in the introduction where you actually, I've underlined it, you said, what if this slow consumable poison looks like everything else in the store? How do you protect yourself? And that's kind of part of the problem, isn't it? It's so normalized that I think many people don't really understand anymore. Well, what is a processed food? What is real food? So can you help us try and understand that?
Right. Yeah. One of the first questions we ask in clinic, we used to ask is, mom, the mom and the kid come in, for obesity clinic, and we ask, mom, what do you consider food? Do you think Cheetos is food? If you think Cheetos is food, then basically nothing's going to help you. So that's the first thing we do, is we disavow them of this concept, of this knowledge. So what we did in our clinic to be effective, and we actually studied this, we published on it, we validated it as an instrument. What we did was we took all newcomers, all new referrals to our clinic, and we did a teaching breakfast. So these kids came in fasting, so we could get comorbidity and safety labs. And they saw the doctor, they got their blood drawn, they got their physical exam, and then they went to the teaching breakfast. 6 kids, 6 parents around a table, 1 dietitian, English and Spanish, different times. All right, so that everybody, got a teaching breakfast. And we got a $100 gift certificate from Trader Joe's every month to basically buy the food for the teaching breakfast. And of course, our dietitian went out and bought the right stuff, not the wrong stuff. And she would then narrate he would narrate for an hour why these foods were on the table for breakfast and why the stuff they were buying at home was the wrong stuff. Okay, and we would explain insulin, and we would show them how much sugar was in each of the things that they were getting at home and versus, what was on the table. And 4 things had to come out of that, and we actually validated this. 4 points, 4 different points that conferred success. Number 1, the parent had to see the kid would eat the food. Number 2, the parent had to see the parent would eat the food. Number 3, the parent had to see other kids would eat the food because they got other kids at home. Number 4, we showed them the bill. They had to see they could afford the food. All 4. If we got all 4 boxes ticked, those patients did well. And then there was no going back. So this was a training moment. This was a teaching moment. This was a way we could explain to parents and to kids what was going on and model for them so they can see one, do one, teach one, more like we always do in medical school. If you tell people what to do, they will not do it. If you show people what to do and they do it, then they'll do it again.
Yeah.
And not until.
The term real foods, I like it, you use it, but it does get a bit of pushback from certain academics. And, I saw one, I think on Instagram just a couple of weeks ago, a very prominent researcher in obesity in the UK, denigrating the term, saying it smacks of privilege, it's, all kinds of things about it. And here's the thing, my view, Bob, is that I found it to be very useful with my patients. Of course, if my patients don't like it, I'd come up with something else that they understand. But generally speaking, I think the things like, you know, would your grandparents recognize it as food? I think people find it quite helpful. Or does the food packet have more than 5 ingredients on it or not? As a kind of general rough rule, they're not perfect, but they're all kind of guidelines to try and help people make sense of this ultra processed food environment in which they're living. And I wonder why there's so much criticism. It's like these things are there to help people. If you find it helpful, great. If you don't, fine, use something else. But I find a lot of people, particularly in medicine and academia, look down on these kind of what are considered simplistic terms.
Yeah, I've heard those complaints also before, and I've heard about the quote smacks of privilege also. Basically, what we're saying is real food is food that came out of the ground or animals that ate the food that came out of the ground. That's real food. Okay? As soon as a human touched it, now it's processed. Just a question of the degree of processing also. And, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with Carlos Monteiro at the University of Sao Paulo, developed this system called the NOVA system for the degree of processing, which I actually think is, you know, the right way to go. It's not because it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food that matters. All food is inherently good. It's what we do to the food that's not. And that's the point I try to make in the book. And I have an entire section on what we did to the food that actually turned it from food into poison.
That classification system is brilliant, and perhaps you could take a kind of readily available, simple food and just explain how it can go through these 4 stages.
Sure.
to help people really understand this.
Sure, I can do this in 1 minute. Let's take an apple. Class 1 on the NOVA system would be an apple. Class 2 on the NOVA system would be apple slices. Class 3 on the NOVA system would be applesauce, unsweetened. Class 4 on the NOVA system would be an apple pie. There you go. Turns out that only the class 4 foods are associated with chronic disease.
So we can have minimally. That's really encouraging. So we can have, you know, minimally processed foods that are done to make our life easier a little bit, or you know, but it's when it goes to that extreme where it's actually bears no resemblance to actually what actually came out of the ground in the first place.
That's right. And so what is different about that apple pie versus the apple? And the answer is the addition of sugar and the removal of fiber. So this now brings us to the question you asked me earlier about the protect the liver, feed the gut. So the addition of sugar is what basically floods the liver, because the liver, only like alcohol, only has an innate capacity to metabolize a small amount. We know how much sugar we can metabolize, and it's not that different from the amount of alcohol that we can metabolize, because the metabolism is virtually the same. The point is, you can overwhelm your liver's capacity to metabolize sugar. And when that happens, just like what happens when you over-metabolize alcohol, is your liver can't handle the onslaught. And so it has to take the extra and turn it into fat. And there are enzymes in your liver that turn sugar into fat. It's called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. And there are 3 enzymes that in concert that do this. One's called ATP citrate lyase, the other one's called acetyl-CoA carboxylase, and the last one's called fatty acid synthase. These 3 enzymes are being driven by excess substrate, and that substrate is fructose, then turned into acetyl-CoA by glycolysis. So, bottom line, you're flooding your liver, and the goal is protect the liver. And when you flood your liver, now your liver makes fat, and that fat precipitates. Now you got fatty liver, and now you got insulin resistance.
Yeah.
And now you got chronic metabolic disease. So protect the liver. Second part, feed the gut. Now, a lot's been written about the microbiome. Okay? And there are a lot of probiotics that are now, in health food stores to try to restore the microbiome. And everyone now knows that the microbiome talks to your brain, which is true. It does. The question is, would taking a probiotic, a bacteria, work? Would that fix the problem? Because boy, if that could fix the problem, that would be great, wouldn't it? The answer, does it work? Is there any disease yet that has actually been ameliorated, attenuated, or cured by administration of a probiotic? Name one.
I mean, it's helped. I think it's helped with symptoms in things like IBS. I think it's been shown to make general improvements in mood, sometimes in the right individual, but by and large, amelioration of disease. I don't think we've got that evidence yet, do we?
Well, we certainly don't, and the reason is because it doesn't happen. So here's my question to you, Ron. Think this out. These probiotics, they're bacteria. They're live cultures, right?
Yeah.
They're alive. Whether they're in a pill or not, they're alive. You swallow them. Those bacteria should be able to populate your intestine, grow, take hold, and basically, contribute to your microbial diversity. Yes?
Yeah.
Concept, right? Why do you have to keep taking them? Why can't you just take one? Why do you have to take them every day?
Yeah, well, a lot of them just pass straight through, don't they? And
that's right. A lot of them pass straight through, or they die right there in the intestine, which is exactly what happened to the ones as to why you don't have them there in the first place.
Puts pressure on me.
Because the intra-intestinal milieu that the bacteria find themselves in is not conducive to their growth.
Sorry to interrupt. If you are enjoying this content, there's loads more just like it on my channel. So please do take a moment to press subscribe, hit the notification bell, and now back to the conversation.
The ones that you basically had before have already died. And so you take them every single day, and they're still not populating your intestine. They still haven't actually taken hold and thrived and contributed to your microbial diversity. So basically, they're not doing very much, which is why we haven't seen any amelioration of any disease yet. Because probiotics are not working upstream. You have to change the intestinal milieu first. How do you do that? That's what a prebiotic does. So what's a prebiotic? A prebiotic is food for those bacteria that will feed them so that they can grow. And what's the nature's perfect prebiotic?
Fiber.
Fiber. Fiber is not food for you. Fiber is food for your bacteria. But when we took the fiber out of the food to process it, because fiber basically reduces shelf life, when we took the fiber out of the food to process it, we are now depriving our bacteria of the food they need to be able to live in symbiosis with us. And so those bacteria, the good bacteria, are dead. The bad bacteria have taken over. And the bad bacteria is sending all sorts of bad signals, actually suppressing serotonin generation in the intestine, thereby reducing the anterograde transport of serotonin back up into the nucleus tractus solitarius, and that's called depression.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, because you're not feeding those bacteria, that bacteria are basically stripping the mucin layer right off your intestinal epithelial cells because they can eat that. And that's then exposing and denuding your intestine and making it, all the junk that's in your intestine basically can get through, called leaky gut, contributing to inflammation, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, and insulin resistance. all because you didn't feed your gut.
And,
You
and
didn't
that's
feed your microbiome.
and that's how the whole thing gets tied together here. That some very simple but very very brilliant advice: protect the liver, feed the gut. But the modern food environment, the ultra processing of food, is overwhelming the liver with sugar, and it's starving the gut through its lack of fiber. And then the consequences are the liver could be, fatty liver, type 2 diabetes. But the problem when the gut gets starved and, as you say, leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability sets in, then you're opening up for everything: autoimmune disease, food allergies, Alzheimer's, depression. All these things have been associated with increased permeability in the gut. So it's a very simple maxim, but one that actually, again, going to that nexus of the root cause, it's kind of right there, isn't it? And that's, this is the other thing I really liked, Rob, is that you don't seem to have a preferred diet. Very much like me, I'm always like you. It's unprocess the diet first. Let's just get out the junk. Let's get the real food in, and then let's see where we are. So, how does you feel that like a vegan diet or a low carb diet or a whole manner of diets can fit this maxim of protecting the liver and feeding the guts?
Yeah, I'm agnostic as to the whole vegan keto thing. Look, if people who want to be vegan, fine, whatever. You want to be vegan, great. Don't make anybody else feel bad about their choice, but you can feel good about your choice. That's fine. Okay. There are a lot of reasons to be vegan. Animal welfare, religion, cost, coolness, if you will. But metabolic health is not one of them. Okay, and I can prove it because Coke, Doritos, and Oreos are all vegan. So you can do vegan right, or you can do vegan wrong. Keto. Okay, I'm not against keto. I used ketogenic diets in my patients when their insulin resistance was so severe that nothing else would work, where they had insulin hypersecretion, and basically we had to control their blood glucose rises in an attempt to try to stave off continued weight gain. Either one. So we use the ketogenic diet, okay, and I'm not against that. The problem with the ketogenic diet is not the diet. The problem with the diet is that it's really easy to fall off it. Because as soon as you have even a little bit of carbohydrate, a little bit of carbohydrate is going to raise your blood glucose, therefore raise your blood insulin, and therefore stop the ketogenesis. Because insulin blocks lipolysis at the level of the fat cell. And there goes your lack of substrate. And so it's been shown that people who are left to their own devices in terms of doing a ketogenic diet, they can start with all good intentions, and by 2 months into it, they're basically, they're not ketogenic anymore. They're not making ketones, basically. And then they're on the worst diet because they're on a high-fat, medium carbohydrate diet, which generates both insulin and loads of LDL. And that's kind of like the worst thing you can be on. So if you're fastidious, then the ketogenic diet is a great diet. If you're not fastidious, then you shouldn't be on a ketogenic diet. So it kind of depends on whether or not you can actually, keep it up. And a lot of people, fall prey to, the croissants on the, that the other guy at work brought in. So, bottom line is, I don't have a preferred diet. I'm agnostic on it. I think there are a lot of ways to skin this cat. I think ultimately we will learn the genetics of who does better with which diet, and it will turn out that certain diets are better for certain people and other diets are better for other people. And I'm very interested and, involved in this personalized nutrition, concept and movement that's going on right now. So it may be that there are certain people out there who are on a vegan diet who ought to be on a keto, and there are certain people who are on a ketogenic diet who probably ought to be on a vegan one. And they don't know it yet. So why would you basically put all your marbles in one, goldfish bowl? So I'm for both diets.
Yeah.
The only diet I'm not for is the Western diet.
And the reality is, I think any clinician who has utilized food as one of their tools in their toolbox with their patients, which I hope more and more are starting to do, although it's clearly not enough, you will see that different people thrive on different diets. That's, I think real life clinical practice teaches you that, well, these guys here are literally rocking a low carb real food diet. Their markers look good, their bloods look great, and these people here are doing great on a whole food vegan diet. As you say, the commonality is no processed food or very, very low amount of ultra processed foods.
The commonality is low sugar, high fiber.
Yeah.
Both diets work when they're low sugar, high fiber. And so that's why I think those are the two sort of linchpins in this whole story. But unfortunately, that's exactly what processed food is not.
You used apples before to demonstrate those 4 categories of processing, which I thought was a really nice example. Where would apple juice fit into that? Because that's something that many people are consuming every day, thinking it's healthy. Hopefully they might be reevaluating that at the end of this conversation. But yeah, where does that fit in?
So what happens with apple juice, whether it's, let's just take apple juice that's not also sweetened, right? Because, sometimes they add extra sugar. Just taking an apple and putting it in the Vitamix.
Okay.
Okay, right? Let's do that kind of apple juice, okay? Apple juice that's been Vitamixed, or the Jamba juice. Okay, people say, that's great, right? Because that's whole fruit. Well, it was whole fruit. Now it's not. So, you have to understand the problem of fiber. Now, fiber, we've been talking about it like it's one thing. And that's not correct. Fiber is 2 things. 2. One's called soluble fiber. And an example of that would be like inulin or pectins, like what holds jelly together. Hydrogel. It's what's in cream cheese. And then there's a second fiber called insoluble fiber. And that's like cellulose. That's like the stringy stuff in celery. It's also what's in cardboard. Okay? So,
Yep. Okay. So today it's a silver SUV. Just went up that back road back there. Silver SUV today.